In some instances, reason can be like a disease of. Sometimes we can see things from so many different angles, from so many different perspectives, to the extent that we don't even really know what we're looking at, right? Sometimes we can see a detail of something, and we can get so caught up in that detail that we don't see the totality of that thing. Sometimes we can see a potential, but we get lost in terms of the eventualities, or I should say, the several different eventualities that those potentials may lead to. So, in short, we often get confused in trying to rationalize and trying to analyze to the nth degree a particular situation, to the extent that we really make something out of nothing, right? And or sometimes we do the converse, which is we make absolutely nothing out of something, right? Because we're not able to see the reality. So on the 27th of July, there is a total lunar eclipse, which will be taking place in Sravana Nakshatra. This is a very powerful lunar eclipse for several different reasons. Number one, it's a total lunar eclipse, which means that in many places on the earth, when you're viewing the eclipse, it's going to be blood red. And that starts people's tongues wagging as to how it's the end of the world. But it's not the end of the world. It may be the end of one set of circumstances, or the beginning of the end of one set of circumstances. Can I say that? Beginning of beginning of the end of one set of circumstances, and something that's leading to the beginning of another set of circumstances. In addition to that, this particular lunar eclipse is a conjunction between Ketu, Moon, and Mars, all in one closely knit section of the sky within about 2 degrees of each other. So there's a lot of potent energy, especially considering that Mars is retrograde. So there's a lot of confusion, even more so than usual with lunar eclipses. And so why is there confusion with lunar eclipses in general? Because when there's a lunar eclipse, what's happening is the shadow of the Earth, shadow of our reality, or the existence that we're going through materially in concrete terms, because reality is always somewhat illusional on a certain level anyway, or bound to perspective, I should say. So there's a certain amount of confusion with that. A shadow of the earth is being cast upon the moon, which relates to manas, or our sensory mind, the way we perceive things, the way we understand things, the way we react to things. And so we tend to react during lunar eclipses in a manner that doesn't always honor and respect the reality of a situation in the first place. And with this particular lunar eclipse, a day before, Mercury will be stationing and turning retrograde in Magha Nakshatra. A couple of weeks before this, about 2 to 3 days before the solar eclipse that precedes this particular lunar eclipse, and about which I've done another video, Jupiter will station direct, okay? So there's a lot of confusion in regards to which direction forward. And there's a huge tendency to miss the forest because of the trees. And yes, it's no coincidence that I've got that picture behind me. It, completely suits it, right? You can get lost in all these details of the tree. I'm going to move my head out of the way. But do you see that light beyond? Do you see that light beyond? It's trying to call you forward, and it's saying, you know what, if you're going to get stuck in all those details, even though those details are meaningless, then you're going to miss the way out of a situation, right? So with Sravana Nakshatra, there is quite often the confusion between paths, or all sorts of different eventualities, and how they're all connected. And so whilst there has been an ongoing conjunction between Ketu and Mars in Sravana Nakshatra, there's been an immense amount of confusion with this that about the time of the lunar eclipse begins to kind of come to a head. And so there's a lot of confusion, and you're feeling like, because there's so much confusion, that, right, in order to sort through this, I just have to kind of shut down my feelings. I just have to kind of shut down what I'm feeling about this. I may want to act, but I don't really feel like I'm somehow prepared to act. I feel like I have to come up with a solution, and I feel like if I don't come up with the solution, then my dignity is at stake, and that somehow I'm not going to be seen in the way that I really need to be seen in regards to this particular situation. In short, well, I guess you could say on a certain level, it feels like everything is falling apart. But nothing is falling apart. Something is coming together. Something is coming together. But for that something to come together, something else has to collapse. And what is that thing that has to collapse? Well, that thing that has to collapse is, I'm going to say it, is your ego on one level. Your ego has to collapse, right? Your ego has to collapse. That fear of losing face in regards to the situation, the fear of not living up to somebody else's standard has to go by the wayside. This thought that you kind of have to ignore your feelings and just get on with the situation and restrain yourself from taking action, that needs to go by the wayside too. And the fact that you think that you have to rationally analyze your way out of this particular situation, which isn't going to do you a damn bit of good. I'm going to say that. Trying to analyze your way out of this, it's not going to work. Reason can work in a positive manner. But reason is meant to serve the soul. It's meant to be used for proper discrimination. Sorry, got tongue twisted. Proper discrimination, proper discernment, the capacity to differentiate between one thing and another. But when the emotions are being suppressed, that they have nowhere else to go but to erupt onto the stage of your life, you're going to be seeing things in a very tainted manner, in an emotionally tainted manner on a certain level, right? And so I'm not saying you need to detach from the emotions. As a matter of fact, you probably need to do just the opposite. You've probably been suppressing those emotions for so long that you're not able to really understand how you feel about something. And so it may sound somewhat contradictory. On one level, I'm saying the emotions are kind of getting projected out there and you're getting caught up in those emotional things so you can't see the reality of the situation. Well, that's the truth. But the reason they're getting projected out there is because you've been suppressing your feelings about this particular situation for so long. So what's the best thing to do? You can't repress those feelings anymore. But at the same time, you can't let those feelings rule you. And so on your end, you're going, yeah, right, but how am I going to do that? I'm not perfect. Well, it's tough. Let's say that. It's tough, right? You have to confront those feelings. You have to allow yourself to feel them. You have to give yourself permission to feel them first, but you have to accept responsibility for them. You're the one who chose to suppress them in the first place. Right? And when you choose to repress your feelings about a particular situation for so long, they have nowhere else to go but to act themselves out on the stage of your life. And then you find yourself in positions where you're becoming somewhat emotional with another individual, or you're just needing to detach from everybody else in general in order to work your way through a situation. Neither of those is really the best path because it's not going to allow you the interaction in order to understand the situation appropriately if you kind of like detach and run and hide from your emotions, right? And if you go into them so deeply, you're going to be like kind of cut off from everybody externally to the extent that all you can see are those emotions. And so what you have to do is you have to acknowledge, if you feel angry, you have to go, right, I'm pretty pissed off. Right? But that's my anger. It's not my partner's anger. It's not my child's anger. It's not my boss's anger. It's my anger. And I own responsibility for that anger. When you own responsibility for that anger, what is it that you can do? When you own responsibility for that anger, you can go, what is really making me angry? I have the choice to remove myself from the source of that anger, or I have the choice to stay with it. Right? This is the K2 Mars aspect of it. I can continue to hold myself back from those things that I feel like I shouldn't do because if I do that, then all these things are going to happen and I don't dare do that because if I do that, it's going to start a whole chain of things into motion and I don't know where it's all going to end up. Well, no, you don't, right? And so maybe you need to explore that a little bit more. But at the same time, you can't ignore the fact that you're frustrated. You can't ignore the fact that perhaps you feel paralyzed in terms of the choices that you can or cannot make, right? And you can't ignore the fact that there's all these emotions that are welling up inside of you. So what to do with those emotions? Confront them, own them. They're yours, right? If they're making you feel sad, what are you sad about? Most likely because your needs aren't being met with a particular situation. So you can recognize which situation satisfies your needs more, the one you're sticking with that you don't feel is satisfying your needs, or some other situation that you can try to bring into existence which might more fully satisfy your needs. You ultimately have to make that decision yourself. It's not for astrologers to make that decision for you, right? It's not for astrologers to make that decision for you. It's for you to make that decision yourself. On the other end of the sky, of course, every time we've got a lunar eclipse, that happens when one of the nodes is close to a full moon and the other node is close to the sun. So on the other side of the sky, there's this interaction between Rahu and the sun. Okay, so on one level, you've been in a situation where you've been serving the situation. You've been serving the situation to the extent that you're finding yourself in the position where you don't know where you're really at with all of this. There's an identity crisis on a certain level that's going on where your soul and the nature of your existence and your essence and your understanding of who you are has been somewhat eclipsed by a situation that you have decided to stay with. So what can you do? Do you decide not to stay with that? Well, do you decide to overly analyze the situation? None of those things are going to help you. What is going to help you with this particular lunar eclipse is following that retrograde Mercury. That's the key, you see, because that retrograde Mercury in Magha Nakshatra is trying to tell you that you can separate yourself from God, right? Magha Nakshatra relates to the ancestors, the Pitris, the ancestral deities. The Pitris are always there to offer us guidance, always there to offer us insight, but they have to do it in very subtle manners. Why do they do it that way? Well, because being here incarnated in a body, that's pretty tough business, right? And in order to do that, you need a strong sense of individuality in order to maintain your perspective on who you are in contrast to who everybody else is, because otherwise you'd be lost kind of swimming in the gulf of everything, right? So you need a strong sense of individuality. So they can only drop you hints here, there, and everywhere. But when you kind of place yourself in the position where you go, right, I don't need anybody and I don't need anyone. Instead, I just need to take a look at this situation. I need to analyze it to the nth perspective. Then all you're going to be doing is focusing on what you think you should do rather than tuning in to what you're being guided to do. Right? That's been the problem all along. You've been so lost in self, so lost in expression, so lost in your pride and how that's coming under threat because you doubt yourself in regards to a particular situation. You've been so lost in suppressing your emotions. You've been so lost in suppressing your will in terms of taking action. And it's time, the very beginning of that time, for all of that to come to an end. But it starts with one step. And that one step is not suppressing those emotions. Because the more you suppress those emotions, the more you shut down your intuition. And with Mercury retrograde in Magha Nakshatra, you need that intuition. You need that intuition so that you don't get caught in the details of the trees, but instead see the fact that all these trees are together with their roots in the ground. They're drawing nourishment from the same source. And together, they form a forest. And there's a symbiosis that's going on here. There's a symbiosis between me and my partner. There's a symbiosis between me and my child. There's a symbiosis between myself and my boss. No matter how much those people might piss me off, or no matter how much they may kind of place me in a situation where I feel like, yeah, I've got needs too, and I'm not taking care of those. No matter how much that might be going on, there's a symbiosis. So look at the purpose that symbiosis has served. Decide if that symbiosis that's going on between you and whatever it is, whether it's your job, whether it is your car, whether it is your office, whatever that symbiosis might be about, which is going to be determined by, on one level, where this eclipse falls in your particular chart. Determine if that symbiosis is something that's worthwhile, or if that symbiosis is something that's in need of evolution, or if that symbiosis is something that you absolutely positively need to move on from. And again, I'm going to say it, an astrologer is not there to make the decision for you. The decision ultimately is up to you. But what astrology can do is it can help you to see clearly the nature of the situation that you're dealing with. It can help you to see the forest and not just the trees. And so seeing the forest and not just the trees, you can see the way out of the forest. And it's up to you to make that step yourself. So I'd be happy to help you to take a look at that bigger picture if you're interested in scheduling an astrological consultation with me. And if you're interested in doing so, all you have to do is follow the link above in this video. That will take you to my astrological services page, where you can schedule the astrological service of your choice. That's going to do it for this look at the total lunar eclipse in Sravana Nakshatra, which takes place on the 27th of July, 2018. Until next time, please do take the very best care of yourself. Bye now.